thanks to organizers, thanks to the guys for sorting out the VGA issues now as well. It's always been a kind of bucket list item for me to come to Brazil. So it's amazing here. Thanks for having me. I wanted to find out, just before I got into the talk too much, who's into pen testing here? Who does penetration testing? Just put your hand up. Okay, and then who's on the other side? Like, who's seen like the RFQ process? Who's ever worked on like the sales portion of the penetration testing? Okay, we've got a few. Okay, so this kind of talk is for both sides. It's going to be really interesting. I think you guys are going to find out a lot more of information from the reason why I asked those questions a little bit later on. But basically, it's about obtaining critical information from really publicly available documents. You're going to basically see a lot of stuff that creates like vulnerable situations for corporates through the actual process of procuring penetration testing. So like everybody says that there's like this supply chain attack thing. This is a portion of it, but yeah, I think you're going to enjoy it. So basically more about me. I work in penetration testing. It's been almost 20 years. I've been doing penetration testing. I own a firm in South Africa, which is an international firm. And I'm trying to kind of keep a balance between work and life, but I love what I do, so it's very difficult. And I've done about 4,000 responses to penetration testing RFQs, maybe a little bit more. So that's why I did this talk, because I found some interesting stuff. For this specific talk, I looked over about 350 RFQ documents, and I'm going to get into some really cool stuff. So what the cyber? So like you're going to hear a lot of these words, which I hate in this presentation. And it's basically the reason why the title in my talk title actually says kill the buzzwords or forget the buzzwords is because we talk about the buzzwords so much in terms of like the sales process. People are really pushing the cyber and the apt and the kill chain just to get sales, you know? So like sell devices, you know, sell antivirus, sell EDR, cyber next gen, buy my product, you're going to be 100%. And I'm saying that's pretty much a bunch of rubbish. So all around, it's really easy to set up these companies. It's like very simple for us to set up a competitive firm that actually doesn't even do pen testing or doesn't even do like actually sell products, but to get the information we're looking for in terms of an additional attack vector. So we'll be doing that a little bit later. That's not specifically for this talk, but what I'm going to be highlighting is like incorrect procedures in the RFQ process. So when you actually like go out and tender for work, that's where the valuable information is for attackers. Another thing I'm trying to focus on here is like forget the buzzwords. We focus too much on 0 day. We focus too much on these crazy attacks. I think Jason and I have spoken about it many times. How are we getting into networks these days? Misconfigurations, password one, like password problems, incorrect firewall rules, like out-of-date daemons. Like it's just the standard stuff we've been dealing with for the last like 20 years. The 0 day stuff is really cool. It's like I love the 0 day stuff. But it's not really how guys are breaking into networks right now, unless it's a really specific targeted attack. All right, so we're doing this whole process wrong. With the whole RFQ process completely messed up, difficult to fix. I'll talk about that a little bit later. But it's not something that's a segregated thing. So it's not something that's only in my country. It's basically worldwide. I'm going to be giving you examples of incorrect RFQ procedures like throughout the world. Some countries call it tenders. It's the same kind of thing. But basically, it's a request for quotations or a request for proposal on a set of work. So very similar scenario would be a company comes to you guys and says, I want a penetration test. I have X amount of IP addresses. How long is it going to take? How much is it going to cost me? That's a typical scenario, just to explain that. So essentially for large sets of work, like all these very big corporates like telcos, banks, things like that, they go out on what we call like public RFQs or more closed RFQs. So you'll get a lot of information from those documents, which I'm going to go through now, which basically will help you during enumeration. And this brings in a lot of different complications. So there's a lot of complications that come with providing that information just blindly out there. And what we're essentially doing is we're inviting a whole bunch of people to learn about our network that we don't trust. So we're basically giving them the inner workings of our business and of our company without actually asking for anything in return. We don't even know these people, but that's what people are doing. So I'm going to give you a real life scenario. I mean, obviously, like I said, I've been doing this for a long time. Last month we had a tender briefing, RFQ briefing, and there's about 40 suppliers that came to this tender briefing, and tender briefing is basically like when you ask questions about the tender, because it's a big set of work. So you'll say like, okay, we need like 10 resources, or it's going to be like 100 mandates for the project. It's like a significant project, so you have to ask questions. So basically like 40 companies came. We don't even have 40 pen testing suppliers in our country. We don't have 40 pen testing. I think we have like 3 or 4. So it just showed us like there's a whole bunch of random people there that are like basically learning about your business and about your company. And how exactly are you guys vetting that list of companies or people that are just coming to learn about your business? So basically what I'm saying is, let's just invite the attackers. That's basically what people are doing. They're basically saying, well, come and listen to, what my network's about. And along with like all these random companies, we also find like people that are like really like focused on random sets of work. So they will sell anything to make money. Basically, they'll sell toilet paper, or they'll sell like concrete, or they'll sell anything. They just see an advert and they say, well, I can do penetration testing. It sounds pretty interesting. And then they'll find a supplier, somehow. And again, that's like a massive issue. So what we're basically doing is we're seeing information like external IPs, internal IPs, like network diagrams. I'll get into a little bit of a bigger list, but typically these things are advertised on the internet. So you'll see them on the internet if you just search for RFQs or tenders, and you'll see them in newspapers. So some countries by law have to put it in newspapers. They have to say we're going out because of the procurement process. And there's basically 2 major problems that's wrong with that. The first case is basically we can win a set of work by just going in super cheap, so basically like normally cheapest wins. So we go in super cheap. We don't really care about the price because we like these bad guys. And then what we do is we actually attack the company, we steal the data, we cause the financial ruin, and then we could disappear. So that's case 1. And case 2 is better yet, like what we do is we find out all the information about the company. And then when the real test happens from like the real good vendor, like we just kind of exclude ourselves, then we really actually attack the network. And we cause major damage, and we can blame that penetration testing firm probably for that damage that we caused, because they know they're getting a penetration test during that period. So they're not going to blame some random attack vector. They're probably going to blame the pen testing firm for causing some damage. So there's a lot more issues than this, just some of them. Then we have the issue with resellers, which I basically spoke to you about. So there's like always these people that will come to you and say, all right, and this exists here a lot actually, where basically like we've got this deal and like we know the guy or whatever the story is, so we want to do the work through you guys, we just want to put a little markup on it. Resellers, complete nightmare. It's like a massive problem. First of all, you don't even know who's dealing with the data or where the data is actually going at the end. But it's a massive issue because sometimes we have customers and we hear about the RFQ documents from a random reseller rather than the customer. It's a crazy situation. So all of these is because of procurement ties. So like they'll know someone, for example, in like the business, and they'll give them a tip-off that like basically they're having a tender for a penetration test or something similar. And then randomly we'll hear about it because somebody will come back to us asking if we can do penetration testing to help them with one of their customers. So this is all stuff that really happens. Like the stuff that I'm going to show you is real scenarios. You can search for it. I included links for you to actually just look through right now. And this is an active thing that's happening in South America for us, and obviously Africa and other continents, where they force specific vendors to win sets of work. That's how it works. Anyway, so one of the things I want to focus on here, and that's why I'm saying like who was penetration testing and who was basically on the other side, is that the procurement process isn't tested enough, especially during red team assessments. I hate the word red team, but like it's not tested enough in these like really big penetration tests. So people focus on like hardcore enumeration, pen testing, 0 days, blah, 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 when they can probably just hack the kind of procurement process, as I've explained now. And obviously the supply chain, like we're always talking about that kind of thing. All right, so another thing for you guys to actually kind of put your foot down is that a lot of companies, it happens quite often now, is they ask for a free proof of concept before you do the work, the actual main set of work, which is complete rubbish. You must never do that. Don't shortchange yourself, know your worth. Real life scenario, we've been operating for 20 years. We had a very large international financial institution about 2 months ago come to us and say, we basically have this huge set of work and want you to quote for it. So, all right, cool, sounds awesome. So we quote for this set of work, and they said, no, it's going to be like a year. So we get excited, it's like a big set of work. And they want to go ahead with us, and then the guy phones us and says, the main guy, and he says, no, like, actually, we're going to sign off. We want to sign off, but before we sign off, we actually have this application that we need tested, and that's not in budget. So like if you can just test that now, then we'll like sign off your work. So that sounds a little bit dodgy to me. So we basically said, I'll tell you what, why don't you sign off the work, and then we'll just deduct it from that, other way around. And he says, oh no, you know what, I'll get back to you. So randomly we get an RFQ, like an RFQ document, massive RFQ document with all our information in it. And it says, what we need you guys to do is tender now for the work. And randomly included in the terms is that we have to do a free proof of concept on a system that has predefined vulnerabilities. So we're like, okay, well, that sounds a little bit better because it's predefined and sounds like a whole bunch of companies of, they're testing a whole bunch of companies against each other. So we said, okay, cool. So we tender for this work, put all this effort in, and they come back to us and they're like, oh yeah, excellent. Like you guys have got through to the next round. So we said, oh, that's cool. And they came back with a whole bunch of questions and we answered them again. And they said, cool, now you guys get to do the proof of concept that we spoke about in that document. So we said, cool. So we carry on. Randomly, like on a Friday afternoon, like without any kind of communication, we get a WhatsApp message with an internet banking URL live in prod with credentials. And they're like, you can start testing on Monday. We're like, this is, I mean, there's so many issues with that. I can't even get into that. But basically, they gave us a live production internet banking system to do a proof of concept for free on in order to prove ourselves as like a real good vendor to get the rest of the work. It was complete rubbish. Basically, they just wanted a free test, and they were trying to get all the vendors to do the free test for them. And when we said no, it was like a massive thing, and obviously, they basically said no, and we said, look, just give us the other vendor, which I don't even think there was another vendor. But essentially, for us, not only is internet banking is like a horrible idea to just randomly give to someone and like prod to test, but the whole process that these guys went through was terrible because they basically could have given random criminals like credentials to internet banking and the go ahead to basically attack it. So that's what we're seeing. Anyway, so how do we exploit this RFQ process in more detail? This is an extensive diagram that we created in-house, and it's a 16,000 line piece of code, and that basically enabled us to exploit certain processes and correlate events like all together across like different media. And that basically enabled us to gather like advanced information from RFQs, which basically we used to then like obtain this highly classified information that I was talking about from our potential targets. So basically the code was so advanced that some say that Rodrigo didn't understand it, which is quite interesting. And our CTO, William and Manny, like they also didn't understand it. But anyway, so I'm completely joking, that's a bunch of rubbish. It's a search engine optimization diagram. Basically everything is handed to us on a silver platter. So we don't need to write anything, we don't need to do anything, we don't have to hack anything. The targets are basically just giving us everything, and it's Google, literally. That's all it is. And when I mean everything, that's everything. So before I get into the actual screenshots of a couple of like live things that you guys can search for like right now, I'm going to give you some personal examples of like where RFQs have gone wrong. One of them is that we had a very major international bank that basically issued us a purchase order for over 2 million. That wasn't actually for us, it was for another vendor, like one of our competitors. So basically awarded us the work that we didn't even tender for $2 million. I don't even know how that happens, but it's a massive procurement problem. Another thing for you guys to realize is that they can cancel purchase orders. So they just cancel that purchase order. Purchase orders mean nothing. Another one is that we had a very large government institution which basically issued us with an award letter that was actually in our competitor's name with our competitor's pricing on it. So it basically said like, dear XYZ, congratulations, you've actually won this set of work for this X amount of money. Which led to a whole bunch of other problems because we knew that that tender was specifically catered for the cheapest price. So we were cheaper than that price and we still didn't win. So there's like some other thing that's actually going on there. But essentially like there was a lot of information that we shouldn't have been shared. Then we had an international telco, a very large one as well, that sent us an Excel sheet with our pricing and 5 other vendors' pricing with all the services they're offering and a lot of other confidential information that shouldn't have actually been shared. And this is like a kind of day-to-day thing that we're seeing, which basically says like there's no care that's being taken by these people or by these corporates. And these aren't small businesses, they're very large businesses. And then we had like a revenue service, like the IRS, very similar to that, that basically issued a tender out and basically told everybody, if you don't know our internal acronyms, our specific ones, then you lose the work. So how, we're not, there's no way that we could have won that. It was catered for a specific vendor, but this is the kind of thing that I'm talking about. And we're seeing it very often, and it's a very difficult thing to actually solve. So, what can we get? Like, what can we get from Google, basically? That's what I'm talking about. So we can get network diagrams, we can get internal incident response programs and procedures, internal hosts, external hosts, we can get operating system versions, patch levels, we can get firewall rules, we can get QA, which is the best, because that's actually when we ask questions, and then they respond to us. So we can basically ask whatever we want, and they'll come and tell us information. We get web application information. I'm going to be going through a couple of examples, pretty much, of each of these. And you'll kind of understand why I'm saying it's like a huge portion of the enumeration process. But don't forget this in your pen tests. Don't forget this. This is like a gold mine, and you don't really have to do too much. You don't even have to go to Showdown. So, okay, so this is the first example. I don't know if you can see too clearly over there. So I'm going to focus on a few little sections here. I have my laser pointer. So, but these are examples from international companies. This specific one is in the UK. And it's not just one country. I'm trying to give like multiple examples. But you can see here, these guys are still running like BlackBerry Enterprise Server and something called EduServe. But this is the kind of information that we're interested in, which is basically, we know they've got like a VPN. They're running BlackBerry Enterprise Server, Microsoft Exchange, Outlook. They're running multifunction devices, printers, scanners, copiers. Anybody who's at DEF CON, we know what printers can do from those attacks. And a SafeCom application. They have like various firewalls, blah, 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 but we're kind of like interested in EduServe as well. So I'm not going to go through this specific screenshot in more detail because it's got a few, but you'll see now, like BlackBerry Enterprise Server, Microsoft Exchange, and Outlook. The department's two BlackBerry Enterprise servers should be subjected to a configuration review and IT health check for compliance. So we know there's a compliance check. Probably like just a checkbox thing that they're doing, so they just chucked a whole bunch of information in here. But what we also know here, and this is quite cool, is that the interface between MS Exchange servers and Microsoft Outlook shall be tested for compliance with best practice on one laptop connect and Roam connected laptop and one thin desktop client. My best part of this whole thing, and this is the information that is useful for you guys, is that we can see that they're running outdated applications. So in other words, Outlook 2003 and the thin desktop clients run Outlook 2010. So we kind of have good attack vectors before we even worrying about the internal or external network topologies. We know what they're running. So this kind of changes the game plan for us. So going further into this tender, it's amazing because they even tell us what kind of domain controllers they have, like what software is running on their domain controllers. So this whole section over here, basically, besides basically telling us that domain controllers are running in different locations, so we can see that running in like Sheffield, Westminster, like different locations in the UK, and even further ones, like you can see these two over here, they have like clusters. We can basically see what's running at each site. So besides for like the social engineering aspect and like security aspect, we kind of know where the sites are and what those sites are actually hosting. So we'll know like where the domain controller is, and we'll know exactly where, for example, they're running like DHCP. For DHCP as an example, we can see they're running generic. They even specifically quote generic, Windows 2003 server build. So this kind of information, this is amazing for us. They even talk about their AV deployment here, their ISA web proxy, surf control, their deployment, their AV deployments in two different places. You can see they're running Windows updates and patch deployment server from this specific location. So for me, this is kind of like a nice network of, a map of the internal network for me already. And this isn't even like really the juicy stuff. But yeah, so that's pretty cool. And then what we see over here is that they actually tell us like what's out of scope, which is quite cool because that's more interesting for me, like why is it out of scope? But there's 35 live servers on the extranets, which is a small portion are GSI facing extranet rather than internet facing. Then this is also cool, there's 16 firewalls surrounding this extranet. So, so basically like, the information that we're getting from this and the internal network it almost gets to a ridiculous level. At the bottom of the screen, you'll see that they go into nice detail that they're running 9 Cisco PICs or ASA, depends which one, but they're running 9. Firewalls and 18 Nokia, which is cool. They give you the nice versions as well, and where they're actually located as well. So, it's actually crazy because they're telling you where they are, what the firewalls are, the locations, what software they're running, the versions of the software. And this is all public. This is stuff you can search for on Google. There's no NDAs here. It's nothing like confidential. It's nothing weird, anything like that. You can literally search on Google for this specific tender. You'll find it. Then it gets more interesting because in the beginning, in the last 3 slides, I told you that there was something called EduServe. So EduServe is actually like an application in this case, or it looks like application. And what you'll see here is that S2S is a system to facilitate schools transfer people records in XML format, blah, blah, blah. And then it says that each school has its own access controlled upload and download repository. So if you do web application hacking and you know that it's got like upload functionality, what do you think, what kind of vulnerability would you kind of exploit there? So we already have an idea of what we can exploit once we're already in the network. So essentially, like that's typical application security that we're really learning about the inner workings of how the applications work. So for these ones, these are different government institutions or corporates. I'll put URLs at the top so you guys can actually just go there and check them out for yourself. But like these are even more interesting. This seems a little bit blurry on this projector because I think we're running a VGA one now, but it's okay. These are like very typical scoping assessments. This is from government in the US. And what you can see here is that basically like they're talking about internal and external servers, how many live hosts they have, the internal address target space. This over here is this server configuration review portion of the document. And basically you can see there's 2 domain controllers. One is Windows 2012, R2, which is awesome. It tells you exactly which one it is. And one server is 2016. 2 file servers, the versions of them, web server, 3 maintenance servers, Exchange server, voicemail servers, MS SQL servers, SharePoint servers. I mean, it just carries on, right, for these guys. And this is government. So it gets pretty bad, right? Anyway, so what I'm saying from something like this is that we can start structuring our attacks. And if we don't structure our attacks, we can at least have a plan. So let's just say we know a version of something that they're running. We're not these zero-day experts. We don't know how to create 0 day as an example. So we just kind of wait it out until someone else does. And the day they do, we exploit. That's it. So, you know, there's a lot of different scenarios that I can run through, but the basics, this is very serious stuff. Then there's firewall reviews. They even tell you how many rules there are in the firewalls. They have web application assessments. They even tell you that this is credit card based and it's called Symphony. And how many input pages are there for each application? It's 30. How many user roles are there? There's 3 user roles. So we can carry on, but basically you get the idea for these kind of guys. And this is government. Then we go to another government example, and this is Kirkland. So there's a URL again, which is very interesting because this URL over here, when I actually pasted it, it's like /finance plus admin /finance plus admin. It just got me thinking what else is under there. But basically, I didn't look at anything. I want you guys to focus on this because it's city's utility operations. So this is when I'm talking about SCADA. This gets even more serious. And then it actually there's questions here. So it's like, is the electric, water, and sewer in scope for penetration testing? Yes, it is. Awesome. Best part, when was the last pen test done? 2011. Jeez, this is quite a while ago. You have your last pen test. But thanks for telling us. What types of devices, operating systems will be reviewed for the critical configuration analysis? How many will be reviewed? So they give you a breakdown here. There's all Cisco, all Windows, some VMs of Cisco, McAfee, and Linux. So it's quite cool because now we start focusing on AV as well. So we know what their firewalls are running, we know what AV they're running. It does get to quite a funny level because at the bottom over here it asks like what kind of physical security is, and it's like we do not use dogs or guards. So it's good for Jason, I guess. So anyway, what we do know here is it's predominantly a Cisco network. We know when the last pen test was done. We know that there's physical infrastructure attached to this penetration test. It's quite serious. Anyway, so we're going to move on to another example. Also, another gov. So that's quite cool. It gets quite interesting because this is a network diagram, right? So I haven't showed you a network diagram yet, but they even go so far into saying like this is a proposed network diagram. So they have like their current one, and then they have ones that they actually proposed for the future. So you even know what's coming in, like in the future. I know this isn't too clear, but basically it's a typical network infrastructure diagram, and pretty much this is used in a lot of tender documents. It's obviously not the same one. This is a very customized one for these guys, but you can see like registered office 1, registered office 2, like the port office, how they're connected through core switches, where the internet breakouts are, where the firewall is, where the DMZ is, you know, where the Cisco stuff is running. I can carry on with this diagram, but you kind of get the picture. I just included the 2 URLs for you guys at the top because they're actually different RFQ documents, just out of interest. Oh yeah, so this is another example, very cool, because this is actually internet banking. So these guys went out on a tender, huge bank that basically said, yeah, we need internet banking tested. But they tell you what product it is that they're running. They tell you, for example, it's running off Oracle 11G, which is one server, and it has one public IP, well, obviously, like in this case. But essentially, this is the kind of stuff that we see for application assessments. I mean, I'm going to go into more detail with another one now, but basically, like, we see this very often. The problem with this is that, again, like, if you know that there's a new vulnerability that came out in Infosys, I doubt the guys are going to patch as soon as a real-life attacker finds out. So you've got some really good gold information here. Right, these ones are really cool. These are possibly my favorites. These are web applications, and the one I'll tell you about why it's like one of my favorites. And again, this is what the breakdown is for when you do a web application assessment, normally, like typically what they give you. So in this instance, this one is a payment portal. And it actually says this portal is developed for online payments. That's pretty cool. And they give you a URL, temporary only, so you can go view it. So you can actually start getting to like understand the application quite a lot. But then it gets into like a really cool detail. It tells you what version of MySQL is running, PHP, how many privilege levels of access there are. Does the application, again, provide file download facilities? It also has like an upload one over here, and it tells you yes, no. Is it in staging? Is there a CMS? Basically, the list is pretty standard, but it carries on. So we basically enumerated the whole application off one page before going through it. It's pretty cool. This one was specifically developed for IT security professionals. So that's why it's one of my favorite ones. So I didn't go to these URLs, by the way, but you can. I mean, it's still there. And again, like you can even see which MariaDB is actually running here. I mean, this kind of stuff, even for like very basic junior pen testers, it's gold, because you just basically like use Metasploit and you attack it and you're done. But yeah, I mean, this is awesome as well, because it tells you what version of Moodle is running. And if anybody's ever exploited or actually attacked Moodle, I mean, the version is pretty gold in this instance as well. And yeah, anyway, it basically carries on, and it talks about SMS integration as well, like two-factor authentication, email integration. But essentially, this is pretty much everything I want as an attacker, and I haven't really done much enumeration in the process. This is their third application, and with 3 applications in this tender document for them. This one specifically talks about like JSP and HTML. There is actually a CMS in this instance, so we know what we're looking for. It's probably going to be like something arbitrary, but anyway. And then again, it does feature file uploads once again. So basically, like, we've got a pretty good idea of these 3 applications, like from the same person, like the same developers, like what they're running, the versions of software they're running, and like how we can actually attack everything in detail before we've actually even started our pen test or, whatever you're getting up to. All right, so this is pretty cool. You might actually even know some of the companies that are mentioned here. These are called like international tender boards, right? And this is for transparency. So basically, a lot of governments actually use this. The US military does it as well, so you know where the spending is going, basically. This is quite cool because it basically tells us who won a penetration test. So if you remember what I said in the beginning, if we know who wins a penetration test, they're already in a losing position. Because in this instance, there's a few things I want to point out, and that's the URL, because I didn't want people to think I'm like dodgy and just made this up. But Deloitte actually won this penetration test, and this one was for Financial Services Board. It's quite a serious tender. Don't worry too much about this. This is a local thing that we do in South Africa. But these companies over here are pretty well-known companies. I'd say like these ones over here. So it's a few audit firms, a few pen testing firms. And one of those pen testing firms is a very reputable provider. And I'd say their pricing is, if you look over here, is about 2.2 million. It's a pretty expensive price, but it's a well-known pen testing provider, so it's acceptable. Unfortunately, they didn't win. Deloitte won, so obviously we can attack the network as Deloitte and phone them and say, we're phoning from Deloitte. Please can you give me more information about your network, because I'm from Deloitte and I'd like more information about your network and applications and IPs and everything else. And they're probably going to believe us because they're getting a penetration test from Deloitte. So they're going to give you the stuff that you need. There's also another spin on this, is that basically we can completely pull out of this tender process. And basically, if we, again, know who actually tendered for that, so they actually signed documents basically saying, okay, there's like 40 different vendors. Back in the beginning of the presentation, I spoke about that. We can basically attack the network again, in this case, obviously, as Deloitte, and kind of cause a massive amount of issues. But we can also back out of the tender process. So as an example, if I'm like a really malicious person, or if it's like a business decision, this procurement process is terrible because I can phone from any of these vendors, right? If I'm the main competitor and I want to win the work, I can just phone them and say like, oh, actually, you know what? We can't actually do the work anymore. I'm really sorry we tendered. We wasted our time. But, it turns out we don't have the resources to actually do this project. And we can just phone from any company, or we can email from any company. So we can email from Deloitte in this case, and we could have kicked them out of the tender process just by phoning them, saying, hey, we applied for this. Unfortunately, we can't do the work. We don't have the resources. Sorry about that. Please exclude us from the process. They're going to exclude you. And then another vendor is going to win. So this is a mess. And, there's problems. I'm not saying it's easily fixed, but it gets worse. I spoke to you a little bit earlier about resellers. This is where the resellers tie in, because a lot of these other people here are completely random companies, like never heard of these companies before. And if you just remember this kind of 2.2 million over here, I want to show you something. The next slide, obviously still people that lost, but right at the bottom is 31 million. So there's a slight price discrepancy between even the one of the most reputable vendors in this tender and like somebody that's completely random. And this is exactly where resellers come in. And obviously it said didn't pass functionality evaluation stage, but 32 million, I don't think it would have won anyway. But it's 15 times the standard pricing of like a really reputable pen testing firm. So it's crazy. And this is the stuff that we're seeing. And unfortunately, like those companies are actually winning work and they can't do the work. So, all right, so here's another one. I included the URL just for transparency again. This is a centralized data center, which basically has, as you can see over here, like 300 servers, 700 endpoints. It has IP phones. It basically is running Splunk, which is quite cool for us to know. So, it's pretty cool. Then they go into some weird detail. They even tell you like, oh, please provide average number of firewall-related changes received per month, and like 10. I do about 10 changes a month, but they give you that information. And then obviously, like going back, and you can see this is pretty standard. This isn't the first document you've seen now. Windows 2003, Server 2012, Windows 7 and 8, Linux, IIS, AIX, HPUX. So it carries on. We know that certain pieces of software are end of life, so they're probably not going to be patched. But when stuff like Eternal Blue came out, like if you knew exactly what they were running, even if you didn't, there's going to be issues. Here's more questions from the same document. I actually took out the response of this one because it starts to get ridiculous. But we do know that they're running Cisco ASA firewalls. We know that they have SmartNet 24/7 AMC details when it's actually valid until. The last part that I actually took out, it's like, what is the expected SLA response once there's an intrusion? So I actually took that out because I didn't want to actually include it here. You can still go to the tender document, it's still there, but like basically like they're telling us how long we've got until they find us, or even they start finding us, which is crazy. So we know kind of like the window for exploitation as well as the software versions that we're attacking. So basically what I was saying before about waiting for an exploit to come out, we can just wait for an exploit to come out. We can exploit the software. We know how long it's going to take for them to respond to our attack, and we can get out of there. So it's pretty cool for an attacker or pen testers. Right, so this one is quite a serious one, and I was like debating putting it in this presentation or not, but I decided it is Brazil and it is hackers to hackers, so I'll include it. This is the Reserve Bank, which is pretty serious. And this basically handles like all of our transfers in and out the country. It's really big. So I'm going to read this out a little bit for you because I think that the screen's a little bit like small. But basically you can see this business systems and technology department in conjunction with the national payment systems department within the bank are seeking services of companies to provide web-based security and penetration testing. On the web-based user interface, SAMX Web, for the bank's real-time gross settlement system, SAMOS. So we're talking about a real-time settlements, international cross-border payments. Then it goes into general architecture design overview. Now you can see why I debated putting this in. But the URL's there, so it's a Google thing. And here it is. So basically, we can see exactly how everything works and properly. It's how Swift transactions would work and how SwiftNet interacts with local SAMX Web. And essentially, like you can see at the bottom, it's an architectural logical view. So participant web browsers, SwiftNet browse, the SwiftNet fin copy, HTTPS, thank goodness, thank you. VPN box, the user session goes over here. And basically, like, this is a really good diagram of how everything works. I'm not going to go into too much detail. You guys can play around with it if you really want to go into more detail, but this is what I really want to see as an attacker. And obviously, the actual Swift messages are still encrypted, I think, and I hope. Not that I 100% believe that based on the pen tests that we've done, but pretty much this is as serious as it gets. Then it goes into more detail in the same one. It basically tells us more about the Samos app and the database server, and how it's actually hosted, and the DB2 database management system, on what kind of mainframe partitions actually running, and the application binaries and where they're physically stored on a SAN. So obviously the transactional messages are the Swift Alliance access messages. So if you're doing an international Swift transaction, those are the actual messages that say like where the money's going to, the amount of money and everything like that. So if you're a bad guy, you pretty much know everything that you want about like a major, way to get money out of a country. It's crazy. And then we have the application server, so they go into more detail. And basically, thanks for explaining how the SAMX web application actually works. But we also know that we can see as J2EE application components on an AIX partition. So what I was telling you before about enumeration, this is even more enumeration, but obviously more serious enumeration on something more serious. And the critical systems basically like this, if you worked on mainframes and if you worked on things like this, they hardly ever get patched. It's too risky to actually patch those things. So if we've got information like this, it's pretty cool. Anyway, user authentication is actually discussed as well as sessions in this documentation, and how it integrates with SwiftNet Evolution to authenticate users during the login process. But it provides user authentication information, services information in detail in this document. Even tells us about the sending and receiving of messages and how they work from the Samos application to via MQ and Swift Alliance access. If anybody knows about the major attacks that's happened, this is, again, pretty serious. Anyway, it's really nice to explain how everything works to us in terms of Alliance as well, and how HTTPS connectivity from the SAMX web users routed via SwiftNet via VPN box. All of this stuff was in that network diagram, but all that we basically see as pen testers is easy money. That's kind of how we see it. I'm pretty sure that criminals see it the same way. I'm going to go into another section here, basically about user authentication authorization. So in this specific slide, it basically tells us what kind of two-factor authentication they're using as well. So we know like exactly what we're dealing with. So we can see that there's two-factor USB tokens, PKI certificate combination, which is actually provided by Swift. But we know what we're in for, like if we're attacking these guys. So it's not like the surprise. Getting to the network, we don't know what's going on. Like we know what we're in for if we actually get into the network. We know where to go. And you can see at the bottom here, the user authentication is based on proprietary application level user repository integrated in SAMX web application service. So yes, there's segregation of duties. You can see that in multiple applications layers. But again, my favorite part of this entire tender, and this is the most serious one that I'm going to talk about, is that right at the bottom it says that the successful vendor will be provided with additional details and a copy of the SAMX trust model once the NDA is in place. So I don't really know what other information that we actually need, but yeah, I mean, it's just, this is open for anyone. You can actually see there was no NDA signed here because it's telling you that if you're successful, you'll then sign an NDA. So that's enough of this. I think you get the idea. I just want to go into a few more. There's not too many slides left. I know it's like the last talk. But basically, this is not only for pen testing. It basically relates to AV, it relates to EDR tenders, it relates to basically anything in IT, not just cyber. So I'm going to go through like one or two examples, nothing too big. Short examples. Pretty sure one or two people know what this is. But basically, it's the official site of a municipal government in Canada. So Halifax, I think that's how you say it. It looks pretty official to me. You can see that they have like bus transit schedules and all that kind of stuff. But what they did is they went out on tender for endpoint security. So as an attacker, I know exactly what kind of endpoint protection is being used. And they basically said this is how many units we have as well, so we kind of know how many endpoints there are that need to be protected. But as an attacker, we know how many endpoints there are and what they're using as endpoint protection. So they provide nice contact details as well with a phone number. So if you've got any questions, you can just phone, ask them, But you'll see here, I know it's difficult to read at the back, it's Synaptic Endpoint Protection version 12.1 Essential Support Renewal, academic license, please. And anyway, it goes into detail about that. So you get the idea, like if we combine all the information from all the tenders that we're going through, we have a significant amount of information about the target that we're actually attacking. Here's another one. This is the Oman Gas Company. Pretty serious, pretty big. And you can see they work around the clock, so they're hard workers. And what they did is a very similar thing, McAfee plus endpoint protection, but in this case, they're actually looking for upgrades, because obviously they didn't like the current one. So they upgraded from ETP to CTP, which is like endpoint threat protection to like complete protection, complete endpoint threat protection. I think that's what it's called. And it goes back to the buzzwords match threat points, complete, blah, blah, blah. And what we can see here again is that, they basically need licenses from this date to this date. It's actually up to April this year, so this is pretty recent. And they need maintenance licenses. They need that data loss prevention endpoint licenses. So again, and obviously the amount of units is pretty essential. So yeah, you're getting the information. You understand what I'm talking about here. They'll have standard licensing at the top as well, which is normal McAfee licensing. But for endpoint protection and for attackers, this is pretty serious again. Anyway, so enough of the examples. There's a bit of a scale here, and I obviously have to discuss it because I keep on talking about like a typical pen tester. We smashed this, we broke into this, we destroyed you, blah, blah, blah. It's really difficult to solve this. And it's kind of like a thing for corporates and government where it's transparency versus the XYZ. When I say XYZ, it's that at the end, the companies kind of go through this whole process for transparency and for best price and for best fit. It doesn't work. And fixing that is very hard. It's not necessarily always the best vendor that's going to win. Some technicalities, vendors get knocked out because they forgot to fill in a form correctly or tick a box. And that's the reality. It's really a fine line for me, as somebody who's worked on this for 20 years, between exposing your key assets, exposing confidential information, and really being like somebody who's untrusted on a network versus just looking for transparency. So, and tender review. It's a difficult thing for me to actually look at because I know what I would choose after going through all of this. And obviously we can discuss supply chain attacks because this is just the beginning of it. And we spoke about it briefly yesterday at the other conference that we were at. But basically, we can go through the supply of desktops and we can go through the supply of laptops and microcontrollers and all sorts of other things where we can backdoor before we even get this, before we even do any of this, we can basically supply really cheap computers to a corporate and we're already in. So for me, it is difficult to solve, but we need proper information security experts that are actually managing information security products, services, IT-related stuff, not just random procurement people looking for the best price or the best amount of points or whatever it may be. So there's a little challenge for you guys that did actually start a while ago. There was something called J262 from a BIOS. If anybody can tell me what that was, you maybe get a little bit of a prize. It might show my age though, so just have a think about it. Anyway, so like I said, solving this issue is really hard. What do we do about this issue? My advice: close tender processes, like specific vendors. You have 3 vendors, 3 trusted vendors. You vetted them, or 2, or however many you really trust. You vet them thoroughly: criminal checks, background checks, qualifications. Really trusted, well-known vendors who have been around for a long time, have a really good track record. Contactable references. Pick up the phone. Have they done pen tests before? How were the results? Was it like a bit shady? I want to see your soft credentials. I need to see the criminal checks. Like, be as thorough as possible, but also get involved in that procurement process. So this is specifically with regards to pen testing. I'm talking about overall, the security department should be involved in procurement that any device comes into your network. It could be anything. And also, don't advertise randomly on websites like that. I mean, this is stuff that you guys go do it now, like after this, so you can do it right now. You can just search for RFQ or tenders in google.gov and you'll find it. So I know it's tricky because they have to go out for that transparency, but again, it's that scale I spoke about. And most importantly for me is, again, going back to right to the beginning of the presentation, is like forget all the buzzwords that the vendors are using to sell their products and services and everything else. It's an overwhelming thing. If anybody's walked through any kind of vendor hall at any of the major conferences, you'll know what I mean. But the last point is basically just remember this presentation, remember what you saw. If you've got any questions, I'm here. I try to finish pretty much exactly on time, so I have a few questions, and also because it's the last presentation of the day. So thanks a lot, guys. Thanks for having me.
So I like it from the social engineering standpoint of like when they do the license. Can you go and elaborate more what you can do from knowing when they're impersonating like agents or something when their licenses are up, or when you know when they're when they're broadcasting, when their license is up, you can impersonate or something. Is that
Exactly.
something is that a good process to do?
Yeah, exactly. So it's the same as when you phone and like just cancel your tender, as an example. You can phone and say, we're phoning for the renewal, and the software that you provide them can be backdoored. It's a very simple process. Well, simple, but you understand what I'm saying. So you can, for example, if the McAfee license is like $100, you can make yours $20 per license. They're going to buy it, and chances are they're probably not going to check that McAfee hasn't got something weird attached to it. So yeah, that's like a really good attack vector. We've actually used that in pen tests, so that's like real life scenarios.